Hi, my name is Eitan Ben David on Judaism and philosophy, and this time about Spinoza, Spinoza, the most thorough and serious philosopher I know, yet at the same time, probably the happiest of them all. He lived between the years 1632 and 1677 in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and in his main book, The Ethics, he has set out to build his philosophy in a structure that was quite different from the way typical philosophers at that point in time and in other periods of time used to lay out their philosophies. In order to build a structure that cannot be refuted, that is bulletproof, says Spinoza, I need to work like a mathematician, just like Euclid did in his Foundations of Geometry, starting from axioms that cannot be refuted in any manner, and then proceeding step by step, very, very cautiously, very technically, so that when I get to my conclusions, no one can argue against them. So, just like mathematics, just like geometry, we start with a set of as few as possible axioms, such as between 2 points there can only be one straight line. And starting from this very minimal set, we go step by step until we can build a fortress that cannot be refuted of more serious, more advanced statements, such as any triangle can have exactly a sum of 180 degrees for all its angles. And indeed, Spinoza starts with a set of 7 axioms, and his critics would say that by picking those axioms, he actually has his own method already hidden within, then proceeds to, again, just a few basic terms, and from then he takes off, and the sky is really the limit. Discussions or proofs about what is God, what is the soul, what are the emotions, what are the things that enslave us, and what is the path to redemption. Those are the 5 parts of the book, basically all the big questions in life. Now, it might seem a bit strange to discuss emotions in part 3 as part of that very logic fortress that we've just mentioned. In our modern view, typically, one would think that those things are separated. There's logics on one hand, there's emotions on the other hand. They don't mix, they cannot mix. Well, Spinoza, for one, does not like in any way making any separations, and this example of emotions versus logics, this is not a separation that he would be willing to make. And in his introduction to the 3rd part, he would say, I shall consider human actions and desires in exactly the same manner as though I were concerned with lines, planes, and solids. Everything is the same, everything is on the same level, no separations. Now, before diving in further, it might be worthwhile to stop for a moment and ask, what is the motivation? What would we gain from this great endeavor, from this great effort? In order to answer it, it might be worthwhile to take a look at what Spinoza has written in one of his earlier writings called On the Improvement of Understanding. And what he writes there would probably give us a very strong hint about his motivation and perhaps also ours. And here's what he says. After experience had taught me that all the usual surroundings of social life are vain and futile, seeing that none of the objects of my fears contained in themselves anything, either good or bad, except insofar the mind is affected by them, I finally resolved to inquire whether there might be some real good having power to communicate itself, which would affect the mind singly to the exclusion of all else. Whether in fact there might be anything of which the discovery and attainment would enable me to enjoy continuous, supreme, and unending happiness. The motivation for this whole logical fortress, this whole endeavor, is to reach unending happiness. That is the goal. Our everyday lives are full with sorrows, small despairs, emotions. We're being thrown from one emotion to the next. We all know that, right? That's the general human condition. But what Spinoza sets out to do is to build this kind of logic fortress, which would allow him, at the end, him and us, to reach the divine, to touch the absolute, to touch God. And the main concept that he's using is the intellectual love of God. The intellectual love of God is the key to our redemption. And here's what he has to say about that in the Ethics. In the appendix of the fourth part, we have the following. Thus, in life, it is before all things useful to perfect the understanding or reason as far as we can, and in this alone man's highest happiness or blessedness consists. Indeed, blessedness is nothing else but the contentment of spirit, which arises from the intuitive knowledge of God. Now, to perfect the understanding is nothing else but to understand God, God's attributes, and the actions which follow from the necessity of his nature. So the key to happiness, the key to redemption is knowledge, which is not surprising given that we have a philosopher in front of us, but not just any knowledge, but the knowledge of the absolute, the knowledge of God. And this is a notion that Spinoza could have probably gotten from Maimonides, the Rambam. Maimonides says that the more we study about nature, about how the world works, about how the works of God actually work with the laws of nature, doing their such amazing work, and everything has its reason, and this whole enormous mechanisms work together, this is something that would fill our hearts with joy as part of the process of understanding God better. We can understand more about God by studying the nature around us, by studying sciences. The more we know about God's actions, the more we are closer to understanding him and to reach our goal, which in Maimonides' terms is always understanding God as much as man can understand God. And it might be also worthwhile to focus on the last 4 words in the excerpt that I've just read about the essence of his nature, the essence of God's nature. Spinoza does not believe in free will. He thinks that all of our actions are predetermined, but unlike many other philosophers, he also does not think that God has free will as well. Also, God has the essence of his nature, which does not allow him to do any action on his own, out of his own judgment or free will. So we said that the intellectual love of God is the key to redemption. But why is that the case? Why love specifically? So it's a good thing that we have a book, The Ethics, which also elaborates on each and every emotion, what it actually is. Now, providing a definition, as we saw, just like we're working with lines and planes and solids, we have it for basically all of the emotions. So let's start with this is in chapter 3 of the book, on the definition of what happiness is. So happiness is the transition of a man from a less to a greater perfection. So when I'm evolving and getting a better or greater perfection, this is defined as happiness. All right. And now let's move a couple of pages forward and see the definition of love. Love is happiness accompanied by the idea of an external cause. So that it is not just any happiness. Happiness is getting myself into a greater perfection, but along with the accompaniment of an external cause, an external idea, in the Platonian sense, perhaps. And so a quick example would be, I love my wife. This is a very, very nice external cause. So this love is actually the happiness when it is related to her, to the idea of my wife. Now, it would probably matter quite a bit what is the specific idea, what is the specific external cause that I'm working with. So as long as I would be working with the external cause, with the idea of the absolute of God, that would immediately mean that love is much better, the perfection is much better, and actually this is the key to my development, the key to my evolution. So when I'm studying, I'm learning, I get this external cause of God, of the absolute, This is also my means of getting to be a greater person, a better person, and so on and so forth. And it resembles quite a bit the notions that we have in the Symposium by Plato, where Plato has made a very strong connection between studying, learning, knowing, and love and evolution. So the more I love, the more my love is based on the proper ideas, the good ideas, and the higher the better. This is exactly the kind of work that would allow me to be a better person, and at the end of the day to reach redemption, also in Plato's terms. So love, happiness, external ideas, God, everything works together in order to provide me with the means, with the ability to evolve, to get myself greater and greater, and eventually to reach the redemption. So let's agree that the intellectual love of God is our key to redemption. But let's talk a bit more about this God. And Spinoza's God might not be the same God that typical people would have in mind. You may remember that I said at the very beginning that Spinoza is a very serious and thorough philosopher. Now, what I like about those kind of philosophers is that they work with their principles and they don't get scared in case their conclusions might not be the same conclusions that everyone else has reached. So the main intuition that we have about God is that He's infinite, He's absolute, He is the smartest thing that there is, the mightiest thing that there is. So far, so good. Now, thinking about the things that we know around us in the world, and here Spinoza takes on his teacher René Descartes, which he also has some, of course, criticism on. So we know about two modes of existence. One mode is physical things in the world which take space. So the books behind me are taking space, the table is taking space, and so on. So that's one thing. Another thing is thoughts. Thoughts exist, but they do not take place. So those are two different things, two different modes of things in the world. And as far as Descartes is concerned, these are the only two modes that are out there. We don't know of anything else. Either things are physical, taking place in space, or they are related to the mind. Our basic intuition about God was that He is infinite, right? So it means, for one thing, that He has more than just these two modes. The fact that we can only think or are only familiar with these two modes doesn't mean anything. No, He has infinite modes that we just cannot grasp. So that's one thing. Second thing is about the taking place in space, right? That's one of those two modes that we're familiar with. It means that God is everywhere, but this is not your standard God is everywhere theme where we say, yeah, God knows everything and He's always near you when you call Him and so on and so forth. This is something very different. The fact that God is infinite also in terms of space means that He is manifested everywhere in each and everything. Okay, here's a cup. God manifests itself also through or in this cup, or the books behind me again, or the table, or me. Everything is a part of God. This approach is called pantheism. God, everything. God is everywhere. There's no place or no thing that is kind of too low or too insignificant for God not to be manifested in it or through it. But this goes on in a much broader sense, because if God is everywhere, then God is nature. Deus sive natura, that's the Latin original of the ethics. That is, there is no separation anymore between God and the world. Spinoza writes in one of his letters that each and every religion that he knows is basically built on that separation. There is God and He created the world, created nature and so on. He doesn't like any separation, just like we saw before. Also, in terms of the Platonian split between our world right here and the celestial world of ideas, where we have the original and pure beauty or pure equality and so on and so forth. In Spinoza's world, we have only one thing, and this one thing is nature, is God, no separation between anything. So we said this is not in line with any religion, and it might be a good point to say a couple of more words about Spinoza's biography. At the quite early and young age of 24, he gets excommunicated, expelled from his Jewish community in Amsterdam. Why, we don't exactly know, but it might have something to do with his ideas, as we get to know them earlier from his book about the Bible, that we should treat the Bible just as text, which leads immediately to see quite many difficulties in it, which might lead us to think that God didn't really write or was the actual source for the text. Now, as opposed to many other people who got excommunicated, it was not very urgent for Spinoza to run directly, into the warm hands of Christians around him or any other religion. And he became the role model for many people after him of a person that is fully committed and loyal to his own self, to his own individuality. And basically remained without any religion or community other than his own followers throughout his life, being quite the first person in the modern age to live in such a way. Now, the funny thing reading the book is that we have such a tension between the manner in which it is written and the image of Spinoza that rises up through the text. It is written in the most scrutinized manner of bureaucracy, of a claim and a proof, and this is because we said that in sentence in thema number 36, and this is because of that, and everything is kind of step by step, nothing gets left behind, everything is meticulously handled. Yet the image that we get of Spinoza from between the lines is a person coming up right from the hippies, 60s, happiness, dancing, joy, and this tension is amazing. Now, if Spinoza would say, hey guys, there is no tension. He doesn't like tensions, he doesn't like separation. We said that. But having this difference between the manner in which it is written and the feeling that you get out of it when you think about the person writing it, it's really amazing. So what is the enslavement described in chapter 4, and what is the key to redemption that we have in chapter 5? So the enslavement is the fact that we're kind of trapped within our emotions. We're thrown from one emotion to the next all the time, and that is forcing us to be enslaved. We are getting more and more free when we understand. First, reading this dictionary of emotions, we understand what really each emotion is, and we understand that we can break free of them, because the fact that the world is such that we have those horrible news every morning, it doesn't mean that we should allow us to impact us. We need to take the zoom out, understand that we are all part of God, everything around us, and so on and so forth. We can get ourselves freed of those emotions by focusing on the one thing that counts. You got it right, the intellectual love of God. So once we understand that, we have the ability to impact the way we live. As part of it, we also understand that what happens in the world, the history, what happens around us that causes all of those emotions, this is not because God has decided that this is how things should be done. The history is the creation of man. Men are acting in the world, and this is what we get, right? So it's not that our happiness lies only on God intervening either to many people at once or to one specific people, like the idea of grace that we have in some forms of Christianity, for example. No, it is in our own hands, just like history. We can decide to break free of the emotions. We can decide to focus on the one thing that matters. It is in our hands. Now, reading the book, it is really hard not to be carried away by the enthusiasm of Spinoza, despite, as I said, the manner in which it is written. However, if there's one point of criticism that I would like to point out is about the following contrast. On one hand, you say that we have no freedom of choice. We are forced to do what we do. But on the other hand, you say we can break free of the enslavement if we choose to treat our emotions in such a way and to focus on the intellectual love of God. So these two things don't really work together. Either we have no free will at all, or we have free will, maybe limited to our own thoughts and conduct, but still there's a tension here which cannot be easily refuted. But putting this criticism aside, this is really one of my favorite books, and the feeling I get when reading it is really, really great. It is worthwhile to read out the end of this book, where Spinoza makes it clear that he understands how difficult the path he laid out for us really is. If the way which I have pointed out as leading to this result seems exceedingly hard, it may nevertheless be discovered. Needs must it be hard, since it is so seldom found. How would it be possible if salvation were ready to our hand, and could without great labor be found, that it should be by almost all men neglected? But all things excellent are as difficult as they are rare. So he understands, and also we can think about his own biography, that it is rare to be a person that is fully committed to truth. But the path is out there. We can choose whether we take it or not. This is it for this time. See you next time.